to hear
You,
what's going on there. But yeah.
you're also in a
But
tsunami.
yes, an avalanche.
It seems like no one can escape nowadays, eh? Everyone's got.
Yes, it seems to be everywhere.
Yeah. They say before the times of Mashiach, we're going to live in crazy situations.
Yeah. But thank God we're breathing and healthy. So, yeah, there's some things to be grateful for.
Yeah, please
Thank
God,
you.
this also go well. I'm praying for you. And we'll speak, please God, tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. That's good. And Pamela?
Hello, good morning.
Hi. How you doing?
Doing okay. It's pretty much freezing here. I think the last I checked we were at well, that was last night, 7 degrees with the wind chill.
Wow. Sounds nice and warm.
It's very cold, so thankful that we have heat.
Again, thank you for your article. I mean, I read through it and it's going in as is. So I enjoyed the sheep story and the parable. So please God, we're gonna share it. It's gonna go out in 2 weeks hopefully.
Well, thank you. It was an honor to share.
Yeah, no, please God, you can do it more often. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Okay, who else do we have? Avichai, you there? Okay, let's get an empty seat. Okay, that's internet, you there? Okay. Pauline, you there? Pauline?
Oh, I'm here.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm sorry I had my mic on mute because I was talking to my puppy. So
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
Okay, thanks so much for coming. It's your first class, right?
Yes, this will be my first class and I'm super excited.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming. It's great to have you on board.
Yes. My friend Jennifer invited me.
Okay, awesome. So if you want to invite a friend as well, you're more than welcome to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm going to put my mic back on mute because my puppy's starting to cry. So.
Sure.
But I'm here.
Thanks for coming. And Bracha.
Shavua Tov. Hi, everybody.
How you doing?
Good, Baruch Hashem. How are you guys?
Yeah, thank God. Awesome. Good.
Off today. Enjoying the day.
Oh, you're not working. You're
No,
enjoying your
today.
1 day off.
Yes.
Make the most of it. Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming. And Ashton.
Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Not too bad. You?
Good. Yeah, thank God. Good to see you.
Okay. Thank you. Good to see you too.
Good, awesome. Thanks for coming. Okay, who else we got? Okay, and Evelyn, are you there?
I am. How are you today?
Yeah, thank God. How's your week been?
It couldn't possibly get better.
Wow, amazing. No, you're doing really well. I'm really happy for you. You're doing it.
Hey, good.
See, Hashem is with you. Is helping you every step of the way.
There are no words. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy for you. You just go from strength to strength. You just get better and better. Please God.
I'm with you. I'm just gonna be getting my stuff so I can go inside.
And then Chrissy.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, thank God. How are you doing?
Doing good. Had a lot of A lot of prayers answered this week in a very good way. So I'm very thankful and happy for that. And happy to be here today.
Good, good, good. I hope you got the books that thereof.
Oh yes. And I gave them to we gave them to my co-workers and friends, and they're excited and asking questions as they read. So it's nice to see them so excited about something new and something different. You can just see the thirst in them and the excitement. So it's just really neat to watch and to be a part of. Thank you for sending them.
Great. You change your, please God, you should have good health and everything should go well and should continue, your work should continue going better and better.
Amen.
That's awesome. Great. Thanks so much for coming. Yeah, and Carla.
Shalom, Rabbi. Shalom.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good. Yes, very much so. Boker tov from Australia. I set my alarm. I unfortunately I didn't have a very good Shabbat, and it was as if Hashem was saying to me, "Join the class." So even
Hashem gave you insomnia so that you can stay awake.
yes, so but I'm happy to be here. I'd like to be here more often. But it's good to see everyone's faces.
Always welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
keep on going strong enough. We're going to see in today's lesson with the tests which come.
Thank you.
It's going to get good. Right, Chad. Chad, you there? Oh, guess so. Hi there, Chad.
How about now?
Yeah, no. How you doing?
Oh, thank God. Beautiful. Nice to see you.
Yes, good. Thank God. Good to see you. Thanks so much for stopping
Glad to
by.
be here.
Good, awesome. Always welcome. It's great to have you.
Baruch Hashem.
All right, guys. Okay. Is Uzi with us? There we go. Okay, so.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to clear a path to my car with one hand.
Okay. You should have a refresh shalema and good health.
Thank you.
Keep going strong, buddy.
You look good, Izzy.
Amen. That's bright. You guys want some sun? All right, go ahead, Rabbi. Floor is yours.
Great. All right, guys. So if you just want to mute yourself, we'll get started. So today's lesson, we're going to be continuing with the last of the aria before we get started. Hi. Thanks for coming.
Shalom, shalom.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by. Good. I'm sure you're going to have some questions when we're done, so I'm going to wait till the end.
Okay. I'm sure I will as well. And I'm sorry, I've been watching the videos late, after the classes because I've been going to shul on Sunday mornings, and sometimes the studies go too late. I get out like at 10:30.
Good. Thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I try to get when I can. We're supposed to be done there at around 9:45, but sometimes it goes longer.
Thank you for stopping by. All right, good. So guys, so today we're gonna start with the last of the. So for Pauline, who's new, so what we're doing is we're going through this book, Fundamentals of Judaism. This book which I wrote a couple of years ago, and it's a step-by-step, a class-by-class format. So we're now holding on class 29, and today we're looking at the final order of the 39 forbidden activities on Shabbos. And I want to delve into the theme or the topic of today's lesson is building and destruction and the making of a Jew. And I think it's a very important topic, which I think we will all relate to it in a moment. We'll discuss it a bit more, but that's kind of the lesson we can learn behind today's class. So as always, I'm going to start off with the theme of the inner temple. And remember that all 39 malachas, all 39 activities which were forbidden on Shabbos, they were things which were forbidden because these were the activities which were used in the making of the Mishkan, the making of the the, the tabernacle. I think the English word is in the wilderness. And I'll start off with the verses we've been quoting all along. And the verse says that this matter is close to you, in your heart and in your mouth to do it. And I think it gets a verse which we can't reiterate enough times, that today that we don't have a temple, the words of our mouth is really where our service to Hashem is, and our temple resides within us. And our thoughts and our feelings, we're going to soon see, is really how we're going to serve Hashem. And it's about being sincere and authentic, and to match your thoughts and your feelings to speak to Hashem, in a way that is honest and sincere. That's really how we connect to Hashem. So we just kick off, and today we're gonna look at the order of construction. And the reason why construction, right, is forbidden on Shabbos, right? So construction is broken up into 8 different activities, which we're soon going to see. And the reason why construction is forbidden on Shabbos is primarily due to the fact that the Mishkan, the walls of the Mishkan, were made of beams, right, called karashim in Hebrew. And just some of the details behind that we need to know. So the walls of the Mishkan were made to be portable. So as you know, the Jews traveled in the desert for 40 years. And they had a number of stops. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, 42 stops in 40 years. And some of the stops lasted for a few months, some for a few days, some for a few years. But in essence, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was made to be almost like Lego. You can think of it. It was made to be assembled and disassembled, taken from one spot, carried in the desert, and then reconstructed and built in another place. So the building was made in such a way it would be permanent and durable, but at the same time it could be easy to dismantle and pack it up and then travel to the new location and set it up again. So all the activities in construction are going to be forbidden. Now the crushing, the beams, so as I wrote here, the Mishkan was made to be portable, and the beams were made out of wood covered in gold. And the wood which was used was cedar wood, and the commentaries explain where did they get cedar wood from in the Sinai desert. So they say that when Jacob first came to the land of Israel, so he was given a vision, or it could have even been Abraham. It was given a vision. I think it was Abraham, in fact, was given. It was Abraham. Sorry, that was given a vision that in the future his children will need cedar trees, and he didn't really quite know what it was for. He just had the instruction to plant cedar trees, and he did. And the Jews came across these cedar trees, and they used this wood to make the beams of the Mishkan. Now the Mishkan was made out of a series of 48 beams. There was 20 beams on the northern side, 20 beams on the southern side, and 10 beams or 8 beams on the western side. So there was a total of 48 beams. Now these beams were made out of wood covered in gold. Each beam laid on 2 silver sockets, which we're going to look at in a moment. And the beams were supported on the outside by what was called the brichim. Brichim were these poles. You can see in the picture that there were poles which ran across the outside of the walls, and that helped to stabilize the walls so that they wouldn't shake around while they were on the sockets. There was also another pole called the briach hatichton, at the inner pole, which was one long pole which stretched across the entire length of the wall, and that again helped to stabilize these wall structures. Now, in order to make assembly and disassembly easy, so what they did was on each beam it was written it was marked, it was with a number, so each beam could be put into its correct place very quickly. So, for example, on the first beam, it was written the letter Aleph, and then the second beam, it was written Aleph base. So you knew that beam 1 and beam 2 would go next to each other. Beam 3 would be written base and Gimel. So you'll know that would be beams 2 and 3. So when it came to assembling the Mishkan, they knew straight away from setting it up that the beam which had letters base, base, and Gimel, Gimel would be slotted next to one another, and they could set it up quickly. And we're going to see that this writing which they did on marking the beams is going to be one of the malachas, one of the forbidden activities which is forbidden on Shabbos. So that was just something to bear in mind, that the beams had writing on them in order to set them up correctly. Now, the beams were, so each beam rested inside a silver socket. There were 2 silver sockets for each beam. And the way that they made these silver sockets is they had to heat up the silver. So silver has a melting point of 961.8 degrees centigrade, or 1763.24 degrees Fahrenheit. So obviously it's very, very hot in order to melt the silver. So they'll have these furnaces where they'll take the silver, they'll melt it, they'll pour it into a cast, and it would form this particular shape to make the socket. And the reason why we're going to learn about that is because making a fires were used for making dyes, as we learned earlier, that there were different colored dyes. There was the chelis, blue wool, argamon, purple wool, sola shani, red wool, and sheish marsa, right, was twisted linen, which also had to be made. And so there was fire which was needed both for the casting of the different metals as well as for making the dyes. Now the casting had to be done with a very hot fire, but at the same time it had to be a controllable fire, which means that in order for the silver to be purified and melted properly, they had to have control over the fire. We're going to see that making a fire and extinguishing a fire are 2 activities which are forbidden on Shabbos, which we're going to see in just a moment. Okay. Now, the Mishkan was carried and assembled at each new location in the wilderness. And that's going to take us to the end of the 39 malachas of Shabbos, and that is the malacha of carrying or transporting. Now, the pieces of the Mishkan, there was actually a parsha in itself in the end of Numbers, and in the second book of Numbers as well. The Torah lists to us the families, the family of Levi. That there were 3 families: Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. There were 3 branches of the Levite family, and they had different duties of carrying different items. So one family was tasked with carrying all the utensils, the aron, the shulchan, the menorah. Another family was tasked with carrying the walls. Another family was tasked with carrying the outside curtains. And every family had a particular task. And they would go in a particular order. They would wrap up the utensils in a very special way. They would load it onto a wagon, and they would carry the utensils in the desert on these wagons. And that's going to be one of the forbidden activities, which we're going to discuss in a moment. That's forbidden on Shabbos, carrying on Shabbos in a public domain or transferring from one domain to another. And we will discuss that in a class of its own. Now, the theme which I want to discuss over here is what I've written over here is building and destroying is the foundations of faith. Okay, and I heard recently an interesting class, and it's something which is applicable, and it's something which I've often thought about. And that is when it comes to building a building, when it comes to making a building, it can take many weeks and months, of construction to put a building together. And when it comes time to demolish a building, they set it up with the explosives and with their controlled explosion, that they can make a building implode, and a huge sky-rise building can be taken down, in just a matter of seconds. And that's, I think, a very important life lesson for us to learn, that sometimes building takes many weeks and many months, but destruction can happen almost instantaneously. Destruction happens very fast. And that's the power of the nature of reality, is that not just when it comes to building, whether it be building a career, building yourself, building a relationship, whatever it might be, that a building process can take many months to build, but yet the destruction of whatever it is that you're trying to build can happen almost instantaneously. In a couple of seconds, months and months of building can be taken down. And I want to look at that aspect as to why Hashem made the world in such a way that destruction can be so catastrophic, and why it is that Hashem allows, and what can we learn from that? How can we apply that to our lives? So there's an interesting concept which is brought in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, which says the following. It says a person who's been sentenced to death is told, right, that if a person is liable for a death sentence, so he's the Torah says that you have to hang him. The person who's liable to be hung, he has to be hung. But there's a special law which says you're not allowed to leave the body hanging overnight. You have to bury that body as soon as before the sun sets. You have to take the body down and you need to bury him. Now, over there, Rashi, right, in Deuteronomy, on that verse, right, in that chapter, I believe it's chapter 20 or so, says the reason why you have to take him down. He brings a parable. He says there was once a king who had a twin brother, right, and the twin brother of the king happened to be like a wanton criminal, and the king's brother gets caught and he gets executed, and everyone sees the king's brother hanging. And when people walk past, they say, "Hey, look, the king is hanging," right? And it's a big embarrassment for the king that people assume that the person who's hanging, because it's his identical twin, they assume it's the king who's hanging. And Rashi explains that we are all made b'tselem Elokim. We are all made in the image of God, and because of that, a person whose body is disgraced is almost like an embarrassment to Hashem, because Hashem who's being disgraced. Now, I want to take that concept a little bit further and look at a very important concept, and that is the Talmud in Megillah, tractate Megillah. It's one of the tractates. Asks a very important question, and the question is, why do we call Jews Jews? Okay, where does that name come from? Right? Why are Jews called Jews? Now, out of all the names we can call them, we know in the Torah we call them Israelites, right? The Bnei Yisrael. Sometimes we're referred to as the Hebrews, right? The different words, right? Ivrim. But why do it nowadays? We don't refer to Jews, right, as Israelites or Hebrews. We call them Jews, right? And almost ironically, we'll see why it's ironic in the Holocaust, right? So the Nazis made Jews wear a Star of David, and on it said Judah, right? Jew, right? In whatever language it was, Jews, right? That was the label that's been given to Jewish people throughout history. Now, I want to understand what that is. So the Talmud says that a Jew comes from the word Yehuda. Yehuda means to admit, and the Jewish nation has been a nation which has been unlike any other, in the fact that more often than not, they've given up their lives for the sake of their faith, right? And that is what makes a Jew, is that unlike many others who when push comes to shove, and they've been faced with that the question which no one would want to hear, either deny your faith or we're going to kill you. So throughout Jewish history, the Jewish people have been the ones to say, I admit, right? Yehuda means I admit to my faith, and I'd rather hold on to my faith and give up my life. Now, the Gemara says that what makes a Jew is someone that's cast in fire. Right? A Jew is someone that has passed and been through hell. Right? That's what makes a Jew, which means that to get that Jewish soul, you have to pass through hell. Right? That's what I want to look at today in a bit more detail, especially with everything that's going on. I think in every one of us, on a personal level, we all are going through different hells and different kinds of tribulations and insurmountable challenges, right? And hells, and you should know that it's not for nothing. and that you don't just become a Jew, you earn a Jew, right? And that going through hell is the how we forge. We forged out of fire, and that's really what makes us unique, and that's what makes the ability of the Jewish people to last from one generation to another is this unbridled determination to stand in the face of the strongest adversity and to say, I believe in my faith and I'm willing to die for my faith. Right? And I say, whatever you're willing to die for, that's what you're willing to live for. And that's what makes a Jew so special. And I want to discuss a little bit about the first Jew that ever lived. Okay, so Abraham was the first Jew which ever lived. He was the one where God made a covenant with him, and he said to you and your children, I'm going to make a special covenant that eventually your children are going to receive a special gift. They're going to be the ones who are going to be called this nation of Israel, right? Eventually through Jacob, etc. Now, let's take a step back and try and put yourself in Abraham's position. Now, Abraham, for the first 75 years, he lived a life not much different from how you and I would live. His faith was, he had never spoken to God. He had never had any supernatural occurrence happening to him. His belief, which he had in God, was no stronger or no more powerful than any of us have today. It was purely based on his assumption, based on his heart. He had never met God. He had never had a supernatural experience. He just had an inner conviction that there was something called Hashem, and he decided that no matter who stands in his way, he's going to follow with all his conviction, and even if the whole world was against him, and it was. Abraham was known as Avraham HaIvri, and Ivri means the opposite. Abraham was a renegade. He did the opposite of everybody else. Now, if you can imagine the courage of doing the opposite of everybody else, imagine everyone is doing one thing, and you are convinced and determined that what you're doing is right and everybody else is wrong. This was Abraham. Abraham had such an inner conviction that there is one God and he's going to serve that God no matter who criticizes him. And he went through all sorts of hells to get there. Now, eventually, at the age of 75, right, if you think about 75, even though Abraham lived for over, I think, 175 years, it's still at the age of 75. If we imagine a 75-year-old today, he still lived that amount of time, right? That no matter how long the lifespan was, 75 years, he's already got a lot of life experience. Now, imagine for 75 years, almost the entire lifetime, you've never experienced God on any supernatural level. Finally, at the age of 75, Abraham meets God, right? And now he knows that his faith is not just something in his mind. He's now got this confirmation and affirmation that God is real. And finally, it must be a huge relief for him. And Abraham is told that at the age of 75, Lech Lecha, right? Go from your land, leave your hometown. Now, I'm sure for anybody, you know how difficult it is to move to another place, right? To relocate. Now, it can be challenging even when you're young and you're exciting. I say, you're a student and in your 20s, let's say, it could be exciting to change to a new country, a new place. But imagine that as you get older, so you've built up a social network, you've got an established connections, you've got your friends, you've got your family, you've got your income. And Abraham, at the age of 75, he's got his wife. That's the only thing which he has in his life. And he's told at the age of 75, go away, move somewhere else. Now, just that in itself is a huge challenge. Now, for Abraham, he's not told where to go, but God promises him, God says, go to the place. When you start traveling, I'll let you know where you're supposed to go. And over there, it's going to be great. You're going to have a good time where I'm going to show you. So Abraham has faith. He now seen God. He now believes in God, and he trusts God, that God's going to take him to a good place. And he goes to God says to him, head down to Mitzrayim. Now, if you understand what Mitzrayim was the kind of the filthiest place that existed, right, in terms of spirituality, right? It was a horrible place to be. Then Abraham, if you would have picked the worst place that a person could choose, right? Mitzrayim would have been the worst place. Imagine God says to you, I want you to go, and then you start your traveling on your journey, and God picks the kind of the worst location in the world. But you've got your faith. You believe that that's okay. Now, Abraham goes to Mitzrayim. And because Mitzrayim is such a despicable place, Abraham knows that that the Egyptians would kidnap his wife, and he can't tell anybody that his Sarah is his wife. He has to say that Sarah is his sister. Right? He says, because if you tell them that Sarah is his wife, they're going to kill me. But if you tell them that we're brother and sister, then they'll look at me favorably, and hopefully they'll spare my life. So he tells everyone that Sarah is his sister. Now, Pharaoh goes and kidnaps Abraham's wife, Sarah. Now, if you can imagine a man of 75 years old, right, suddenly finds himself stuck in a foreign land with no friends, no connections, no social network, and his wife, which is probably the only support he has, is now being kidnapped by the king. And just to put that into perspective, right, the law of Egypt was that if the king marries your wife, he can't come back to her afterwards. So Abraham, right, knows that once Sarah is taken, that's the end of it. There's no way for him to get back. Right? He can never be together with his wife again. So at the age of 75, right, he finds himself with even if you think about it, how did Abraham make a living in Egypt? What was he doing? Right? There wasn't any way for him to do it. Now he's lost everything. He's lost his he doesn't have any family. The only family he has was his wife, which is now being kidnapped. He's got no children. He's in a foreign country. He's got no income. He's dirt poor, and he's literally lost everything. He followed God's instructions, and God promised him, I'm going to take you, and it's going to be great. And what does it turn out? That God let him down. Right? God said it's going to be great, and if you pause the story at that point, it looks like God has just betrayed Abraham in the worst way possible. Right? He told him, go, I'm going to look after you, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to save you, I'm going to make life good for you. And what happens? The very opposite thing happens. Right? Abraham's now left in the what we'll call not a dreaming nightmare, but a living nightmare. Right? The very worst possible situation that a person could be in. Right? If you could imagine having lost absolutely everything, only for the sole reason is because he followed God. Right? God took him, and it seems that if you pause the story at that point, God betrayed Abraham completely. Right? And this is the lesson, right, of what made Abraham a Jew. That there will be times in a person's life where we're taken to the depth of hell. Right? We're taken to situations which are impossible. Right? These are the situations where the only way to survive is to have faith. And we almost have to have faith, because if we don't, it's either a faith or going insane. Right? That's really where God took Abraham. God took Abraham to the lowest of the low, to the place where there's absolutely no hope left. And the only way that Abraham can actually survive is by strengthening his faith in God. And that was really what made Abraham who he was. That's what made Abraham the first Jew, the first person who's forged in the fire of turmoil, right, and the fire of not having anything and not having any security, being completely insecure, not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring, and having to rely completely on God. Right? And that's what forges a Jew. That's how we earn our stripes. That's how we become a Jewish person. That's how we get that strength. And it's important to know, we just not so long ago we had Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, there was a story of the weak, that the righteous people having victory over the wicked people, and the weak people having victory over the strong people. And it was the underdog who won the war. Right? But we should know that why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Hanukkah is rare. Hanukkah is something which specifically is not the natural order of things. The natural order of things is the underdog loses, and the one who's on the bottom stays trodden upon. And and that's something which you have to bear in mind, that if a person wants to have faith in Hashem, and you truly want that, we have to earn it, right? And the only way to earn it is to be forged in this through in fire, right? We earn our stripes through going through hell, right? And that's really what Hashem does for us. He puts us in a situation where the only way to survive is to you're either gonna have faith or you're not gonna make it, and that's actually for a blessing. And if you do have the faith and you do survive these challenges, which we all go through, we all have our hells, our personal hells, which we're going through, where it seems that absolutely impossible, the worst of the worst, the living nightmare is a reality. And the Torah even says that a person can go through a situation where in the morning you'll say, I can't wait for it to be night. This day is so terrible. And in the nighttime you say, I can't sleep at night. I can't wait for the morning. And these are the kinds of situations that Hashem can put us in, and we earn our colors, we earn our stripes and badges through going through hell. So a person should know that the Talmud even says, if a person has experiences 30 days and he doesn't go through a horrible experience, he should start worrying that maybe he's getting his reward in this world. So a person who does go through hardships, you should know that Hashem is actually making you. Hashem is building you up. So it's very important. We shouldn't give up hope in the hard situations we face, because that's exactly the way how Hashem builds us up. And that's really the foundation, right? That building and destroying is the foundations of faith. Right? Faith comes from being built up and being destroyed. Right? So Abraham had a whole life. He built up himself up, and his life was destroyed. Now the question is, after the destruction, there's only two ways out. You're either going to give up or you're going to increase your faith. And a person who increases his faith through the destruction, that after the destruction he rebuilds, that's how a person is made. That's how a real person is developed. And that's really, I think, something which we can take in mind and apply to our everyday lives. The importance of destruction, and the importance of how easy it is to break and to fall, and why it is that Hashem made it in that way, that it can take many, many months to build something. Right? A person can take many months to build a family, to build a career, to build whatever it is that he's working on, and then instantaneously it can all be taken away. And in that situation, in that hardship, in that difficulty, that's where Hashem lies. That's where your faith is tested, and in those difficult situations, that really pulls out your real character of who you really are. You only really get to see who you really are, right, when you tested in those situations. So I think something for us to remember. Okay. Now, taking from that, let's jump into the laws of Shabbos. There's 8 different activities which are forbidden on Shabbos. We'll discuss in a second each one in more detail. So just to run through them quickly, the first one is kosev, which is writing, can't write on Shabbos. Moichek is erasing. Boine, building. Soiser, demolishing. Makev, patish, the final hammer blow. Mechabe is extinguishing a flame. Mavir is kindling or making a flame. And hoitzah is transferring. So let's just go through them, and I'll explain a little bit more as we go along. So the first one is kosev, which is writing. The definition is any activity that makes a lasting and meaningful figure on a surface. Okay, and examples would be drawing, painting, typing, and the reason for that is, as we learned earlier, the beams had markings sketched out on them. It was written on the beams, beam A and beam B and C and D, so each one could be placed next to each other. So writing on Shabbos is forbidden. Now, there's a rabbinical decree that you can't write on a moist window pane. So if you have, let's say, a frosted window or the steam, which makes the window frosted, you couldn't write on a frosted mirror, right, on a window pane, you couldn't write on that. That would be rabbinically prohibited. The reason for that is that in order for it to be Torah prohibited or forbidden d'oraisa, it has to be permanent and lasting like it was on the beams. When you write in a window pane, so although there is writing, but it will evaporate, so it's not long lasting. Now, there's other things which apply to that, and that practical applications would be For example, playing Scrabble, when we put letters next to each other, or making a puzzle that could also involve writing. Taking two letters and putting them next to each other can also be a problem of writing. A question I often get asked is, what about typing on a computer, or keyboard, laptop, cell phone? Is electronic writing considered writing on Shabbos? So for the most part, we say it's forbidden. The reason behind it, there's a lot of discussion whether or not when we're writing on a computer, if that's really is writing, or if you're just the coding and it's just the processing. But for our purposes, we're going to assume that writing includes any form of electronic writing as well. Okay, the next one is moichek, which is erasing, and that's any activity whose effect is the production of a clean surface for writing. Now, if we imagine with the beams that were set up in the Mishkan, so obviously if they mislabeled the beam, they would have to erase the writing and correct it and put the right label on each beam so it can be set up in the right place. Now, the definition of erasing is making space for new writing. So, for example, you've got a whiteboard and you rub out the whiteboard so that you can write some new writing on top. So that's sort of erasing, or putting typics over something. So you're erasing for the purpose of writing again. It's a constructive activity that would be forbidden on Shabbos. One of the interesting practical examples which often comes across, some people are particular with it, others aren't, and that is you're not allowed to erase writing on Shabbos. So let's say, for example, you've got a cake, right, and it's written in icing, right, happy birthday. It's a happy birthday cake or mazel tov. Can you cut that cake on Shabbos? Because by cutting that cake, right, you're cutting through the writing, you're erasing the writing. So there are those who are strict and do not cut writing on a cake on Shabbos. There are opinions that personally, this is what I follow, that one can do this on Shabbos, that one can cut through writing on Shabbos because it's for food, and the general rule is that food does not apply. The 39 malachas do not apply to food unless there's very particular circumstances. Okay. The next one is boine, which is building, and that's any activity connected with construction, repairing, or erecting a usable structure or shelter. So that would include hanging a door, installing a window pane, setting up a tent, anything which were involved in the building process. So anything which creates a building or a structure is forbidden on Shabbos, and this is a direct result of the fact that the Mishkan was built and constructed. So this is the direct corollary of that. Now, a rabbinical decree is opening an umbrella. One's not allowed to open up an umbrella on Shabbos, and the reason for that is because it's called an oyo. An oyo is a tent, right? And a tent is kind of a mini umbrella. And the Talmud goes into quite a big discussion of what's considered to be a tent. You know, how big does the tent have to be? What's considered permanent? And if something is open and closed regularly, is that a problem? So there's a big discussion around this. You would need to look into this in more detail. The Shmir Shabbos Kilchas would be a good place to look. But one does need to look in more detail to see that there are certain things which are allowed. So, for example, a folding table can be open on Shabbos, or a baby stroller can be open and closed on Shabbos, but things like an umbrella can't. It's got to do with the structure of it, and there are subtle details. Assembling furniture, for example, let's have an IKEA bookcase. You wouldn't be allowed to assemble that on Shabbos because that would be building. Right? That would be something which would be forbidden, right, as boina. Okay. The next one is soiser, which is demolishing. The definition of that is any activity that prepares a surface for building but demolishing an existing structure. Right? So in general, doing something which is destructive is not forbidden on Shabbos. Over here, the demolishing is specifically just like moichek erasing. You're demolishing for the purpose of rebuilding. right? And examples of that would be is removing broken window to put in a new one. So sometimes you've got a smashed window, and the part of the, before you can install a new window, so you need to knock out the existing shards that are in the window before you can install a new one. So knocking out those existing shards in the broken pane of glass, that would be seiser, that would be forbidden on Shabbos, because you're taking it out in order to empty it to put in a new window. Okay, the next one is what's called make bepatish. That's the direct translation is make bepatish literally means banging with a hammer. And we often translate it as the final hammer blow. The definition is any activity that puts the final touches on or improves or repairs an article. And the examples are removing hanging threads from a new suit. So we touched upon this, I think, last week or the week before, that this malacha comes from the fact that when they made the beams, it was made out of wood, but the wood was plated in gold. Now, the way how they plated the gold is they made these very thin gold sheets, and they used the gold sheets. They would tap it on with the hammer, and they still do this sort of plating today, where they have this a sheet out of gold, and basically, because gold is very pliable, very malleable, so by tapping it on against the surface, basically it sticks, and it creates this connection between the gold and the wood. So that's how they would plate it. So for our purposes, makeh b'patish is anything which brings the final step in making any product, utensil, item usable for the first time. So as a practical example, let's say you bought a brand new pair of shoes and they've never had shoelaces in it before. So it would be forbidden to put new shoelaces in a brand new pair of shoes, because that's now the final step in wearing those shoes, would be to put the shoelaces in. If, however, the shoes have been worn before and your shoelaces break, you would be allowed to put in new shoes, and the reason for that is because that's not that they've already been used. So makeh b'patish is specifically the last step in making something usable for the first time. So it might be, let's say, wearing clothes. The last step before you can put new clothes on would be, let's say, to remove the tags. So removing the tags would be makeh b'patish. It's the last step that's required before one can use that item. Okay, and that's again something which we can look at in more detail. Okay, the next malacha is called mechaber, which is extinguishing a flame. And the definition of that is any activity which terminates or diminishes a flame or a hot glow for a productive purpose. And the examples are putting out a candle to improve the wick. Now, in the Mishkan, the reason when they would put out a fire was predominantly to make charcoal. They would heat up wood until the wood would turn into charcoal. And once the wood was burned sufficiently and turned into charcoal, they'll then extinguish the flames, not by dousing it with water, but making sure to cut off the oxygen supply. So anytime a person would put out a flame for the purpose of improving it later, such as making charcoal, that would be forbidden on Shabbos. Okay, the next one is mavir, which is kindling, which making a fire. And again, fires were made both for the heating to make dyes, to make, as we saw earlier, and as well as the heating when they would make the furnace to melt the metals, such as the silver for the sockets. So one's not allowed to make a fire on Shabbos. So the three examples given over here is lighting a fire, so one wouldn't be allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. Right, they weren't allowed to be smoke on Shabbos, right, lighting a cigarette, right, you wouldn't be able to do that every time that you are creating a fire. And driving is also included in that because we have combustion engines, right? Every time that when we press the gas, the accelerator, so the spark plugs, generate the pistons to move, and it burns fuel. Right? So many explosion is going on within the cylinders of the engine. So driving is a malacha of fire. Now, interesting questions being asked is that in electric cars, it doesn't have a combustion engine, and it doesn't use fossil fuels. So it could possibly be that cars of the future may technically be allowed to be driven on Shabbos. And when we have self-driving cars, it could even be a whole new question. And there's actually a school of modern Torah scholars that are actually studying these very new concepts which are coming along to understand its relevance in modern day law. But for our practical purposes, driving uses fire as the mechanism to propel a vehicle. I think the same would be with any other combustion engine, any other type of fire. Okay, the last one is hoitza, which is transferring, and that is any activity by which object is transferred from one domain to another. Now, we're going to have a separate class on this altogether with the laws of Eruv, and I'll discuss it now. An example is carrying objects in a public road. And I wrote over here, terms and conditions apply. And the reason for that is that this, in fact, this last law has an entire tractate dedicated to it in the Talmud. So it's an entire tractate dedicated specifically just to this one activity. So many hundreds of pages have been written just on this one topic. In principle, we will cover it in more detail, but in principle, one's not allowed to move something from a private domain to a public domain, and vice versa, and one's not allowed to carry 4 amos, which is about 2 meters, or about 6 feet, in a public domain. So you're not allowed to carry something on Shabbos in a public domain for the distance of 2 meters or 6 feet. Now, the concept, you may have heard of an Eruv. Okay, we will discuss this in more detail. Right, an Eruv isn't where people say they live within an Eruv. What does that mean? Right, so an Eruv is a specific way, a halachic way of making a public domain private. And when we have a public domain which is private, so then one is allowed to carry within that domain, because it's no longer a public domain, it now becomes a private domain. That we'll discuss in the laws of Eruv how that's made. Right? I know a lot of people are confused and they just think that an Eruv is some sort of a realtor's concept, that Eruv just means an area where property prices are higher, but an Eruv is actually a halachic term, and it means that it's nothing to do with Judaism per se. People say you have to live within the Eruv. It's nonsense. Right? So a person that's not you need to live, with wherever you want. But what an Eruv is a way that you're allowed to carry on Shabbos without violating Torah prohibitions. So that's what an Eruv is. The reason why many places have set up an Eruv, it's a very modern concept. 50 years ago, the only place in the world which had an Eruv was the old city of Jerusalem. And Eruvs have become something as a modern concept. 50 years ago, there weren't Eruvs around, and people wouldn't carry. Right? As just for myself, growing up, right, it was forbidden for me to carry on Shabbos because there were no Eruvs. Wherever I was, there wasn't an Eruv, and one had to observe this halacha. Right? You couldn't carry. Nowadays, right, so many large cities where there's big Jewish communities have established an Eruv, and it's just for convenience sake to make carrying easier. And so that's all an Eruv is. An Eruv is a technical term which makes a domain. It changes the status of a domain. And when we see the class specifically on an Eruv, we will discuss what an Eruv is. Okay, so those are the takes us to the end of the 39 malachas. What we're going to do next is we're going to start looking at 1 or 2 of the more relevant concepts, such as electricity on Shabbos, cooking on Shabbos, grooming on Shabbos, and the things which are more in depth, which are applied to us on a day-to-day Shabbos. So what we saw that we can't, for example, weave on Shabbos. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time going into weaving because most of us aren't spending our Shabbos weaving. But we do spend our Shabbos walking, and we do spend our Shabbos eating, and we do spend our Shabbos perhaps having to carry, having to open and close things. So the next classes are going to look at, call it the more practical elements of Shabbos, so that one can observe Shabbos knowing the practical laws. And obviously, I do recommend in your own time to learn all the ones that are not practical, because every word of Torah that we learn is precious and it's all important. But in order just to be confident and able to observe Shabbos with confidence, so we'll focus more on the practical side of things. So guys, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself. Happy to take them.
Or you can raise your hands in the group.
Yeah, I got a question if possible.
Okay, Chad, go ahead.
Okay, so actually 2 questions.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to cost you for the second one.
Can you ask the second one first?
Legos. You were discussing not building a full-on structure that would be something you could, be suitable that would stay up. What about just playing Legos?
Oh, good. So it's brought in the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa that playing with Lego on Shabbos, it's not really building, because it's not a structure that you would live in. However, it is recommended that we don't, that children over the age of chinuch don't play with Lego on Shabbos. So, as a practical example, until the age, let's say, of bar mitzvah, you can allow a child to play with Lego on Shabbos. As an adult, one should refrain from Lego on Shabbos.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, that was a good question. We had that question actually yesterday, so it worked out perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So for children,
all right,
it
so
would
now
be okay. Yeah.
The first question,
Nope.
second.
Hey.
Yeah.
You can't go over there.
Second
Go on.
question.
You were speaking about eruv. So what about if one's on his own personal property, and you have, let's say you have your house, and then you have something in a shed that's outside, but it's still on your property. Can you transfer that to the other?
Right. So as I said, it's an entire tractate of how we define the land zones, according to different. But as a general rule, anything which is fenced off, which has a perimeter, so you can have a giant farm, and so long as there's a perimeter all the way around, so that entire area is considered to be one private domain. So you can have a house, in one section, and a couple of hectares away, you can have a shed. But because the entire premises is surrounded with the fence, so it's considered to be one big private domain. So you could carry between the two, even though you're moving quite a large distance. So within a private domain,
would you have to have a like, what about at the driveway? There's obviously an entrance, but it's clear that that's still the entrance to your property. So it's still defined, but it doesn't have like a gate.
right. So there are certain things which what you basically need to have to make it a private domain. You need to have a kaira, or you need to have some sort of fixed object. So, for example, a person may have a post box which has a certain height, has to be approximately 1 meter off the ground and around 30 centimeters wide, and that will act as a perimeter boundary, which will mean anything behind that, even though there's no wall, but it now allocates and demarcates that area as being private. So yeah. So for the most part, a driveway would be considered a private property. But again, there are certain technicalities, and there are, for the most part, that's a general rule. One doesn't need to worry. There are other cases where you have driveways which are shared, in common property and common areas, and that's where it gets more complicated, where an eruv, kind of covers those areas. But for the most part, a private property you can carry within your own home as much as you want.
Do you have to make any type of eruv declaration prior to Shabbos if that's such a case, or does it function as an Eruv regardless, as long as it has those markations?
Right. So there's two kinds of Eruvs. There's what's called an Eruv Techumim, is Eruv Chatzeres, and a Shute Mabuyos. There's different technical terms for it. When one's got common property, one does need to make a declaration. That's for a private Eruv. When one has a public Eruv, such as the ones which are found in big modern cities, so the person who sets it up does make the declaration on behalf of everybody else. So you don't have to. There is a declaration, but it's not your responsibility to make it.
All right. So I guess I'm gonna get rid of my leg. All right, Arya, go ahead, buddy.
Sure.
Well, this is this kind of goes along with that the roof discussion, and I know that I had a friend of mine years ago, and at the time I didn't really even fully understand it, which I understand it better now. But I want to see how it applies. It was on a camping trip, and ended up camping over Shabbat, and we set up a string around the camping area.
Right.
As in the roof, and is that something that's I've heard that the campsite becomes your temporary living.
Yes. Yeah. So an Eruv isn't very complicated to make. There are certain laws, but once you have the laws, it's pretty much straightforward. That string is called in Hebrew a lechi, and a lechi is basically to make an Eruv, all you needed 2 poles and a string. And once you have a string connected to 2 poles, that string now demarcates that area inside. You now have a perimeter. So the perimeter doesn't have to be anything fancy or strong or even protected. As long as you've demarcated the area, it now becomes closed in. So to make a campsite, to make an area around a campsite, you just need to basically put up poles and a string, and you can go as big as space as you want. And then you've made yourself an Eruv.
Okay, it's funny at the time when he was doing that, I wasn't observant, and I was laughing about it, and now I'm trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. So there, as I said, there are certain technicalities, and it's possible to do it wrong, but you almost have to try to do it wrong in order to mess it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Hannah, go ahead.
Perfect.
You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah. I think I'm going to try and not follow Chad's example, but I do have 3 questions. Can I ask them quickly or only
sure.
one?
That's $30.
Just 3 quick ones. What you mentioned about weaving on Shabbos and shoelaces, I get. I have always wondered about zips. So if I'm stepping outside and it's raining and I'm wearing a raincoat, can I zip it up, or is it about?
Yes,
or
you
is it
can.
forbidden? Okay,
yes,
and shoes as well. I can wear shoes that I zip up instead of shoelaces.
Yes, 100%. And the reason for that is that anything which is made to be open and closed wouldn't be a problem of building on Shabbos. So, for example, you can open and close the door as many times as you want. Once the door is hung and it's in its place, opening and closing the door is just a function of the door. You're not building the door. So the problem would be is to install a zipper. So for example, if the zipper breaks, you wouldn't be able to mend it on Shabbos. But once it's there and it's functional and it's working, that's opening and closing the zipper, or opening and closing the shoelaces. It's just a function of the closing as opposed to making it. And so the prohibition is to make or to build rather than to use.
Okay, so I get you, but I just got confused now with shoelaces. I thought we can't tie a knot on Shabbos, so therefore we can't tie
that's a separate. So tying a knot is separate. That was from the prohibition of making knots, which was a separate of the 39 categories. So assuming that you're making a bow and not a permanent and professional knot. So let's say you're making a bow which is loose, which we saw the Magen Avram said that was allowed. So one could tie their shoelaces on Shabbos, and you're not violating not the activity of making a knot, nor the activity of building. So it's 100% okay. There's no forbidden activity in there.
Thank you. And the second one is to do with food. You mentioned something earlier about anything to do with food we can do. I mean, I do know also about cooking that that's not allowed, etc. But things about peeling an egg and an orange, is that allowed on Shabbos?
Good. So the when it comes to food, there is one particular malacha which we learned about, which was boirer. Boirer was separating, and we're going to have a class on separating specifically with food on Shabbos. In a nutshell, we're going to see there's 3 primary rules to avoid separating on Shabbos, especially with food. And one of them, if you're going to be eating it immediately, so then you're not going to violate bar. So for example, if a person has an egg and your intention is to eat that boiled egg right now, there wouldn't be any problem of peeling that egg and eating it immediately. There would be possibly a problem of peeling the egg and leaving it for another meal. So let's say on Friday night, one couldn't, let's say, unpeel the eggs to make an egg salad for Shabbos day. That could be a problem. But if it's for immediate use, for sure it's okay.
Thank you. And final one, I think I might have forgotten it, but it has to do with just the principle of what you were saying about non-combustion cars.
Yes.
That, I mean, what came into my mind as you said that was actually, is it the principle, or is, because, I mean, I suppose we can argue in the future that as long as then we can have stoves that also don't combust. So does that mean we can cook if we're not making smoke, if we're not burning anything? So to what degree do we then use modernity to amend the principles behind observing?
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, so when we see electricity on Shabbos, we're going to learn that technically speaking, a lot of activities may not violate it, but we're going to learn that it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. That Shabbos is a certain spirit which we need to uphold and maintain. So there's certain things which might be technically allowed, but in doing so, it comes too close to violating Shabbos, even though technically you haven't broken anything, but it gets too close to making it into a weekday. So it could be that even if we do come in future to being able to drive and cook and do everything as we would in the weekday, it could be that it will be forbidden simply because it's not in the spirit of Shabbos, which we're going to see in a separate lesson. What the spirit of Shabbos is and how we're meant to maintain that. So, but I do envision that in future there will be certain novelties as things become different, and technology increases. We will be faced with questions that our world as we know it will probably be impossible to live without being connected to the internet. Our doors may not be opened unless we voice command open, and that keys may disappear in the future. Lights may not have switches in the future. They may not be able to have town switches. So these are things which we will have to grapple and face and deal with. And it is a study of Jewish thought as we go along now of how to address these issues, as they come along. I know one question which I was looking at personally is with Siri and with other where you have voice activated commands. Are you allowed to engage with that on Shabbos? And is it forbidden? Is it allowed? Is it and there's various laws which can both for it and against it. But I do envision that the time was going to come where this will be the norm, right? And it will be almost unavoidable to try and escape this. So yeah, we have to wait and see.
Thank you.
All right.
Good.
Anybody
Anyone
else? Dun, dun, dun.
Can you ride a bicycle?
Riding a bicycle on Shabbos. For the only thing which I know of is that problematic is that the chain might come off the bicycle. and there's a prohibition of fixing. So as far as I know, riding a bicycle is rabbinically prohibited on Shabbos. The violation would be is that you may come to repair the chain if it would come off.
Or you could walk the rest of the way.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. So while we choose to live, in close proximity to Jewish amenities on Shabbos, is simply for the fact that it's difficult to avoid some of these technicalities. But yeah, so let's we have to wait and see. I do see it, as I said earlier to Hannah, that transportation is something which I think will change drastically in the coming years. So to wait and see how that pans out.
Riding a bike
Good.
is not
Anyone
carrying an
else?
object.
Go
One
ahead,
more
Chad. You're
question?
trying to ask something.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just if is
Okay, go
riding a
ahead,
bike is
Evelyn. Evelyn first. Oh, sorry.
I'll wait.
Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead, Chad.
So riding a bike is not carrying an object.
Can you say that a little louder?
Riding a bike is not riding a bike's not carrying something outside of your domain or
Um,
transferring it outside of your domain.
So again, assuming that you're inside a domain, so let's say, for example, one's riding in their own backyard, so that then there wouldn't be a problem of carrying. So you could pick up the bicycle and carry it around your garden as much as you want, but there'll be a separate problem that you may come to fix the chain. So that could be problematic, but not carrying could be in like a separate issue. But it wouldn't have to apply in every case. All right.
All right.
Good.
Thank you, Chad. Evelyn, go ahead again.
So you can't build a fire. You can't put a fire out. If you have a fire going, I'm assuming you're not allowed to maintain that fire to keep going,
Right. Okay. So we're going to have a look that although you're not allowed to create a fire on Shabbos, if you have a fire existing before Shabbos, you are allowed to have it going on Shabbos. So provided that the fire, so for example, if a person left the oven on before Shabbos, you could let it continue to stay on Shabbos. The prohibition is to create the fire and not to maintain it. So stay around for the class on cooking on Shabbos. And we're going to see in a lot of detail that this is a very important concept, that it's actually a mitzvah to have hot food on Shabbos, because this is one of the things that the Karaites didn't want to have fires in their houses on Shabbos. And we know that we are allowed to have fire on Shabbos. So if you have, let's say, a fire going with a fireplace, and it's burning, then it's allowed to burn throughout Shabbos. You're just not allowed to add to it, and you're not allowed to create it on Shabbos. But to have it going is no problem.
Awesome.
Your question?
Anybody else? One more question.
Yep. Can you hear me?
All right. Yep. Go ahead, Aria.
Two actually quick questions. Braiding hair.
Yeah. So is braiding hair? There is a discussion of that. The Talmud says that it could be a problem on Shabbos. We will deal with it in the class of grooming. There's two possible prohibitions that you could come across. One could be building, and one could be making a knot, depending on the sophistication of what it is that you're doing. The general custom is not to, but there are certain ways that you can. So hopefully I will discuss it in more detail. But I think what we've understood now from the 39 principles is that not everything is forbidden on Shabbos. It will only be forbidden if it may infringe on one of these 39 core activities. So something which doesn't fall into that wouldn't automatically be forbidden on Shabbos. So the general thing is you can do something on Shabbos unless it would violate one of those 39 activities.
One last quick question. Eggs were brought up, and this is a question. I know that we have to check the eggs prior to cooking them. You know, we check the yolk to make sure that there's no fertilization.
Yes.
How does that work or apply to boiled eggs?
Good. I think so. Hannah asked that a couple of classes ago. And so the law is, well, we will see there is a class when we deal with the laws of kosher, of how that works in general. There's a section, I think there's a class in kosher, I think it's maybe around 52 or something like that, which is a law just about checking eggs. Okay, so it's class 47. It's called sifting flour and checking eggs. And in that class, we'll discuss that in general, there's an assumption which we say we go after the majority. And since the majority of eggs don't have blood spots, so when we boil eggs, we always boil eggs in an odd number. So 3, 5, 7. And the reason for that is that if there was a blood spot in the one, then there will be 2 that are not. And we can rely on the majority in that case. But when we learn the laws of eggs, we understand that blood spots today may not be fertilization. It could just be for another reason that we'll discuss in more detail why eggs do develop blood spots in the first place, and when it's forbidden, and what type of blood spots are forbidden.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, everyone who came. May Hashem bless each and every single one of you guys for your sacrifice. Thank you, Rabbi, for your strength and the class as well. So, all right, guys.
Everyone have a
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.